And while Super Tuesday presents a chance for candidates to secure the largest number of delegates in a single day, it also puts a spotlight on the primary process and how 6 million people are unable to take part. We're talking about independent voters. The Republican primaries today in Alaska, California, Oklahoma, and Utah are closed. So that means independents and others not affiliated with the party can't participate in the Republican nominating contest. And according to a recent Gallup poll, 43% of Americans identify as independent, which is more than Republican or Democrat. So let's dive into this a little bit further. John Opdycke is president of Open Primaries, which is pushing for more states to have open primaries, and Michael K. Miller is a political science professor at George Washington University and focuses on autocracy and democratization. Thank you both for taking the time to be with me on this Super Tuesday. John, I will start with you. Why should independents be allowed to vote in a party's primary?
Well, the primaries are paid for by the voters. They're publicly funded and administered, and independents are voters that want to weigh in on the direction of the country. It's the fastest growing segment of the electorate. These are public elections, and they should be able to participate.
And Michael, traditionally, why are primaries in certain states closed to independents?
If you go back pretty far in American history, there were kind of no primaries at all. It mattered a lot. And so there was a shift only in the 1970s. States just decided they wanted to have the parties really in control of those elections. But there's been a gradual shift towards more opening. And so most states allow either independents or anyone to participate in the party primaries. So it's a continuing shift. And I think open primaries is right. There should be even more participation.
And according to Gallup, we had that number, 43% of Americans identify as independent. That actually ties the high that Gallup found, which was back in 2014. John, why are we seeing more people turning to becoming independent?
Yeah. I think there's a variety of reasons, Chris. I think in general, there is a reaction going on to the toxicity, the partisanship, the lack of a bipartisanship in Washington, the fact that problems go unsolved for years and decades in favor of ongoing warfare between the two parties. You see it, it's not an ideological phenomenon. You have conservatives, liberals, socialists, libertarians, all kinds of Americans are saying, I don't want to be a part of Team Blue. I don't want to be a part of Team Red. I want to be a part of Team America. And yet it's very hard to do that. Independents are not just in primaries, but in so many ways are related to as second-class citizens. But more and more people are willing to protest the kind of, negativity in politics in that way by declaring their independence. And the challenge is, how do we recreate the electoral system, the political culture to accommodate this surging phenomenon?
Because I think for many people, when they hear independent voter, you think of that person who's in the middle. They might be the more moderate type voter. Michael, what's the actual typical profile of an independent?
That's one of the interesting things. Independents, even though they're not registered for a party, overwhelmingly lean pretty consistently towards one party or another. They're independents really only in name. There are true independents, but they're way less than 43% of the population. And that creates a problem because while they're independent, they don't want to be registered, they should have some input on the party's candidates. And what makes it so important in the American system is we have so many uncompetitive seats in the general election. They're just overwhelmingly one party or the other. There's no real competition come November. And so if you have a close primary, it leaves so much of the population completely out of any real decision-making for that seat. So, yeah, they're independents, but pretty consistently lean one way or the other.
Because often the messaging in a primary, you think of the Republican primary when they're campaigning in Iowa, they're really trying to get those conservative voters. John, 2 in 3 voters told Gallup this year that they're tired of seeing the same political candidates. How could more states having open primaries impact the messaging that campaigns would have when they're on the trail?
Yeah, and it's a question not just of open primaries, but nonpartisan primaries. 5 states have scrapped the partisan primary altogether. They now have a public primary. All the candidates are on the same ballot. All the voters get to participate. And what you see in those states is that candidates start to assemble coalitions that break through the traditional red coalition or blue coalition. They bring together Democrats, Republicans, and independents around various policy positions, around various leadership stances. And I think that's the direction that we have to go in the country. And I want to push back against Michael a little bit. Around this whole notion that independents, that most of them are leaners, that they lean to one party or the other. And certainly on election day, independents are typically presented with two choices, and they might show more affinity with one party over the other. But what that obscures is that there is a growing constituency of Americans who really don't like the culture of red versus blue. They might, hey, when it comes to push comes to shove, I might vote Democrat more than I vote Republican, or vice versa. But independents are critical of the binary and are looking for more options and a different way of doing politics. That's my experience.
Because how much of it, and I'll turn to Michael on this, is a party now about culture as opposed to those particular issues?
How much is it? Can you repeat the question? Sorry.
How much of a party these days, being part of the party, it's part of a culture, it's part of your identity compared to a particular issue, compared to what we've seen over the past, let's just say 10 years?
Oh, right. Yeah. No, I agree that people are definitely pushing back on the two-party system. Even people who are registered as Republicans don't necessarily like the Republican Party, right? So I think you really have lost a sense that being a member of a party is any real community. I think people find meaning in different respects. You've really lost that. I think there's a lot of skepticism of the system as a whole. And yet people still have the habits of voting for the parties they've kind of always voted for. So we have this weird sort of disjunction between what people want in terms of reforming the system and how they actually behave. But a lot of that, of course, is because they have so limited choices in our system. So it's not a great place to be in.
And then, John, we have just about 30 seconds. I'll finish with you. As you have pushed forward to have more open, nonpartisan primaries, how strong is the pushback that you've seen from the parties that don't want to have them open?
It's very strong, and they're pushing back in different ways. The Republican Party is more active in trying to aggressively close the primaries to independent voters in Tennessee and Texas and a variety of states, Alabama. They're working to enact closed primaries. The Democrats are less vocal on that question, but if you look at, this is Super Tuesday, and yet it's just Joe Biden. There's no real competition on the Democratic side, so they're actually working to close the primaries, not by shutting out the voters, but by preventing candidates from running. So it's kind of, they're not doing it in the same way, but both the Democratic and Republican parties are looking to constrict participation at the candidate level and the voter level, and that's very bad for America.
We really appreciate both of you taking the time and having the conversation with us today. John Opdycke, president of Open Primaries, and Michael K. Miller, political science professor at George Washington University. We appreciate your perspective on this.
Thanks, Chris.
Thanks.